They thought my silence meant weakness. They thought not fighting back meant I didn't understand what they were doing. While I stayed quiet, they transferred accounts, reassigned roles, and divided my life like inventory. They took everything and called it necessary. I didn't argue. I didn't stop them. I watched. Because when people believe you're powerless, they stop hiding their intentions, and that's when their biggest mistake begins. My name doesn't matter anymore. What matters is what they thought it meant when I stopped speaking. For most of my life, I had been the one people relied on, the steady one, the reasonable one, the person who absorbed pressure so others could function. I was praised for it, trusted for it, and quietly underestimated because of it. When things began to fall apart, no one expected resistance from me. That was the first miscalculation. The change didn't come with an argument or a confrontation. It arrived disguised as concern. Meetings were scheduled without my input. Decisions were framed as temporary. Conversations happened in rooms I wasn't invited into anymore. And when I noticed, I said nothing. Not because I didn't understand, because I understood exactly. Silence unsettles people who expect opposition. It forces them to fill the space with assumptions. Most of the time, they assume the version of you that benefits them most. "She's overwhelmed," someone said once, just loud enough for me to hear. "She probably needs a break," another added. I nodded. I agreed. That nod cost them everything. While they were busy explaining my absence, they didn't notice how careless they became. Documents were signed quickly. Authority was reassigned without scrutiny. Responsibilities were shifted with the confidence of people who believed they were no longer being watched. They mistook my stillness for surrender. What they didn't understand was this: I wasn't quiet because I was weak. I was quiet because I was listening. I listened to what they said when they thought I couldn't challenge it. I listened to how they justified taking what wasn't theirs. I listened as they convinced themselves that I would eventually accept the outcome. By the time they realized I hadn't disappeared, they had already exposed every step they took. And there is nothing more dangerous than a person who knows exactly how you betrayed them and chooses to wait. They started using my silence as evidence. That was when I knew they were past the point of caution. "She hasn't objected," someone said during a meeting I was technically still part of. "If there was a problem, she'd say something," another replied. They said it with certainty, with relief. Silence to them wasn't restraint, it was permission. I sat at the end of the table and watched them speak about my work as if it belonged to a past version of me, something useful but finished. "She was good at execution," someone said, "but strategy needs a different temperament." That was new. Rewriting a person is easier when they're quiet. They took my access first, framed it as security. Then they took my authority, framed it as efficiency. By the time they took my accounts, they didn't frame it at all. They just did it. And still, I said nothing. Not because I didn't know how to stop them, because I wanted to know how far they would go. The moment came on a Wednesday afternoon. A document landed in front of me. Thick, formal, carefully worded. "Just sign this," someone said, casually. "It's a formality." I didn't pick up the pen. I read. Every page was designed to make my absence permanent. Control reassigned, responsibility redistributed, my role reduced to a name in the history section. They thought I'd skim. I never skim. When I looked up, they were watching me, not nervously, not defensively, but patiently, like people waiting for a predictable outcome. I smiled. That smile unsettled them more than refusal ever could have. "You're sure about this?" I asked. They nodded. "It's already been approved." Approved. I signed. Not because I agreed, because I understood. That night, I opened a folder on my laptop I hadn't touched in years. Not hidden, not encrypted, just forgotten, like so many things built quietly by people no one thinks to question. Inside it were records, emails, authorizations, contingencies written in my handwriting, dated long before any of them thought I could be removed. I stared at my name on the screen. Not the version they had minimized, the version they had underestimated. My name is Arden Vale, and the reason they didn't recognize the danger in my silence is simple. They never bothered to learn how I think. They assumed compliance because they had mistaken calm for fear. By the time they realized I had signed the document with intention, not surrender, they had already locked themselves into a structure they didn't control. And once you understand the architecture someone used to take everything from you, taking it back becomes a matter of timing. I closed the laptop. I went to bed. Because the mistake wasn't that they took everything. The mistake was believing I wouldn't remember exactly how they did it. After I signed, they relaxed. That was the signal. People don't celebrate loudly when they win real power. They grow casual. Meetings end early. Emails shorten. Oversight becomes an inconvenience rather than a necessity. That shift from vigilance to comfort is where leverage begins. They stopped checking whether I was copied on decisions. They stopped explaining outcomes. They stopped asking. Silence had done its work. I watched the organization move without me the way a body moves after a nerve is severed, functional at first, then imprecise. Decisions that once followed structure began chasing speed. Authority clustered in hands that wanted credit more than responsibility. I didn't interrupt. I started documenting, not emotionally, not dramatically, methodically. Dates, approvals, language. Language always tells you who believes they're protected. It's within scope, standard practice, already cleared. Those phrases appeared more often, usually when something hadn't been cleared at all. I noticed how they spoke when they thought no one was listening, how certainty replaced caution, how speed replaced verification. They believed the system belonged to them now, because my name no longer sat at the top. They forgot that systems remember intent long before names change. At night, I traced the architecture I had designed years earlier, redundancies meant to prevent exactly what they were doing now. Not kill switches, safeguards, the kind built by someone who understands that power doesn't fail loudly, it erodes quietly. I didn't trigger anything. I waited. Waiting wasn't passive, it was precise. Each unchecked decision added weight, each shortcut narrowed their options, each email written with confidence became a record they couldn't revise later. They began correcting each other in meetings. That was new. Disagreement doesn't weaken power, inconsistency does. When legal asked for clarification, they provided reassurance instead of answers. When finance flagged variance, they blamed timing. When operations requested alignment, they promised follow-ups that never came. Promises accumulate interest. I let the interest compound. One afternoon, someone asked me casually if I planned to move on. The phrasing mattered. Move on from what? I asked. They smiled, embarrassed. From everything. Everything. I nodded. Not yet. They didn't know how to interpret that. That night, I prepared a single file, not a case, not an accusation, a sequence, actions aligned in the order they happened, using their words, their approvals, their timelines. No commentary. Clarity doesn't need commentary. I saved it, closed the laptop, went to bed. Because the moment you act too early, you become the disruption, and I wasn't interested in disrupting anything. I was interested in letting it complete. The first question didn't come from inside the room. It never does. Internal systems protect narratives. External ones test them. An inquiry arrived midweek, polite, procedural, framed as routine. It asked for clarification on a decision that had been fast-tracked months earlier, justified by urgency and approved without the cross-checks I had once insisted on. They forwarded it to each other, not to me. That told me everything. When people are confident, they centralize responses. When they're unsure, they circulate them. By the end of the day, there were 3 versions of the same explanation in 3 different inboxes. Each sounded reasonable. None matched. Consistency is invisible until it's gone. The next request was more specific. It asked for supporting documentation, attachments that should have existed but didn't. Someone suggested recreating them. Someone else suggested narrowing scope. I watched the language tighten. Let's not overreact. Keep it clean. Answer what's asked. Those phrases aren't strategy. They're fear dressed as control. I didn't step in. I let the answers go out the way they chose. Measured, incomplete, confident enough to pass a casual glance. But external systems don't skim, they compare. By Friday, the inquiry had expanded. Still polite, still neutral, now copied to legal. Legal didn't ask for reassurance. They asked for timelines. Timelines are unforgiving. In the following meeting, they spoke faster. Voices overlapped. Someone interrupted someone else. Authority fractured into urgency. I sat where I always had. Quiet, observant, apparently uninvolved. Why is this coming up now? Someone asked. No one answered, because timing is never the question people think it is. Opportunity is. When an external body senses inconsistency, it doesn't rush. It widens. It asks adjacent questions. It notices who answers confidently and who defers. They began deferring. Emails arrived later at night. Subject lines grew longer. Attachments multiplied without clarifying anything. Explanations turned circular. Pressure doesn't need force, it needs time. On Monday morning, a request arrived asking for a consolidated response. One voice, one narrative, one accountable signer. They looked around the room. For the first time in months, no one volunteered. That's when attention shifted. Not dramatically, not publicly, just enough for the chair to ask, who has the full sequence? I raised my hand. No one objected. I spoke once. I can compile it, if you want it accurate. They nodded. I returned to my desk and opened the file I had prepared days earlier. I didn't edit it, I didn't soften it, I didn't add commentary. I sent it. What followed wasn't panic, it was recalibration. Meetings were rescheduled. Language changed. Titles stopped being used as shields. Decisions slowed, not because they wanted to, but because they had to. By the end of the week, the inquiry had become an audit. No accusations, no headlines, just scope. And scope is where outcomes are decided. They didn't confront me. They didn't need to. They had begun to understand that silence hadn't protected me from consequence. It had preserved me for it. Audits don't accuse. They observe. That was the mistake everyone makes when they panic too early, thinking an audit is a verdict. It isn't. It's a mirror. And mirrors don't care how convincing you sound. They reflect structure, sequence, and consistency. The scope widened without announcement. One request became several. Several became routine. Routine is how consequences enter a room unnoticed. Meetings shortened, fewer people spoke, language lost its confidence. Titles were still used, but they no longer carried weight. When answers weren't immediate, eyes shifted, not toward authority, but toward accuracy, toward me. No one acknowledged it out loud. They didn't need to. Authority rarely changes hands with ceremony. It drifts, quietly, toward whoever understands what's happening without reacting to it. The audit didn't uncover anything dramatic. No scandals, no headlines, just patterns. Approvals clustered around the same names. Oversight missing at the same points. Explanations that relied on timing rather than substance. Timing never survives scrutiny. By the time conclusions were circulated, no one argued. Not because they agreed, but because argument would have required a version of events they could no longer support. The room changed. Seats were rearranged, decision rights reassigned, committees rebalanced temporarily. That word appeared again, temporary, this time used with caution. They didn't ask me to step forward. They assumed I already had. When the chair spoke, it wasn't an announcement. It was a statement of continuity, acknowledging what had quietly become true. "We'll proceed with consolidated leadership," she said, effective immediately. No applause, no reaction, just nods. Later, as people filtered out, someone stopped beside my chair. "I didn't realize how much you were holding together," they said. I didn't respond, because holding things together isn't something you explain after the fact. It's something others notice only when it's gone, and then returns without asking permission. That evening, I walked past offices that had been emptied without drama. Doors left open, desks cleared. Not exits, realignments. No one was punished. They didn't need to be. The system corrected itself once pressure revealed its weaknesses. I sat at my desk and reviewed the final summary. Everything closed cleanly. No lingering questions, no unresolved narratives. Silence had done exactly what it always does when used intentionally. It filtered. They thought my silence meant weakness. They thought it meant confusion. They thought it meant acceptance. They were wrong. Silence wasn't what they took from me. It was what I kept. And when everything else was gone, noise, certainty, misplaced confidence, it was the only thing still standing.